don't be afraid to go first, right? Provide value first. So everything is a relationship. There's no B2C or B2B. It's all human to human. And so if you're able to find a way where you're providing value right out of the gate, your close rate and conversion rate and the whole experience is just going to be better throughout, because the more that you invest up front and the more value you provide, the more that you're going to extract out of that, and everybody's winning.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And if you ever need help with yours, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com and grab some time to chat with us. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, John Taggart. John is a bit of an introduction, used to be in a band, and he even signed and I think went on tour for a bit of time, or you signed to go on tour and then it crumbled or it fell apart a little bit as you're going on tour. So you were left without a tour, but you were left with a lot of debt. And then with that, shifted gears a bit, still in the music industry, but went I think to the kind of the ringtone industry. You started with that to sign independent contractors that could sell it. Business didn't go as well as you'd want, so that crumbled after a few years, but then decided to go into a digital or website development design company and a bit into digital marketing as well. So that kind of led you to where you're journeying to where you're at today, and going over that, also working on some courses on how to get started and grow a business. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, John.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So I gave just that high level brief introduction of the of you, and went through a little bit of your journey, but maybe now take us back in time a bit. Tell us about what it was like to be in a band, sign on tour, and start us there with your journey.
Yeah, I promise you it sounds way cooler than it actually was.
It does sound pretty cool to be, I mean, to see that, hey, we were a band, we were signed to go on tour. It does sound cool. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always had that entrepreneur spirit, probably similar to you. And so I just leaned towards music. I love playing drums and playing shows and just got hooked on it. So decided to see if I could take it to the next level and really treat it like a business and hit goals. I've got signed to a small little independent label, did a tour, did a music video. And fortunately the band broke up on the first tour, but hit some goals. And that really was a fun experience and really eye-opening to just how to hustle. And if you set your mind to something, you really can go grab it.
So now question. So walk us through a little bit. So you're you're in a band, you've signed on tour, and that's, I would imagine for a lot of bands, that's exciting in the sense that, you get to go tour, you get to do something that, some bands only dream of if they're playing in the dive bar or the, whatever place they might be, that hey, we get to go tour, see our fans and whatnot. But how did that play out? It sounded like it didn't end as well as it started, and kind of what happened there that kind of fell apart and caused you to pivot.
Yeah, so we had a great local following, but as you got to expand. So we had booked a tour where we would play with local bands in each city across the nation. And so we booked that, and it's really, we have no fans. People don't know about us. They're not coming to see us by any means, but we're just trying to get out there and really just grind. And I remember we played a show in Atlanta, Georgia. I think it was like a 2,000 cap room, and every band had canceled. And so it was just us and literally the sound guy that played his show because no one told us. So that was the type of tour, which is just rough, where I think our per diem was like $10 a day, maybe. So you're just trying to do anything to survive and just get to that next level, get enough fans to then go on tour number 2. But that all fell apart. And being on tour is tough, especially if you're struggling just getting out there. It's hard work, but kind of everything is when you're just starting out, especially startup business. I don't care what it is, but it really is just go and kind of figure it out along the way. Because I feel like a lot of this is, we're all just making it up as we go, but you want to make the best decisions, of course, and mitigate as much pain as possible. So it was a really, really great experience. It was difficult. And then when it ended, it was just kind of left with this, okay, I thought I went all in and now it's gone. Now what? And so that's what kind of transitioned me. Let me see if I can apply this to something else.
So yeah, and that was going to be my next question. So I mean, you tried the tour, you tried to do the band, it didn't work out in the sense that, a little bit when none of the bands that are the local bands that are going to have the draw work out. I'm sure it's hard to, if people never heard of you, aren't on you're not on their radar, they're not likely to go buy a ton of tickets for the tour. But so, that kind of started to crumble or fall apart, and you're saying, okay, now what do I do? What is my, what do I do next type of a thing? How did
Yeah.
you land on the business of doing ringtones and kind of trying that out?
Yeah, so this was back, I want to say 2005, 2006 era where ringtones, everyone wanted a ringtone. So I decided why not? And everything at that time with ringtones was all just major artists, of course, everyone you know of. So I thought, why not create a platform where independent and unsigned artists could come on, upload their MP3 on our website, create the ringtone, and the platform would create those ringtones, and then they could sell it directly on our website. And then we would just take a small percentage. So we really tried to be like ringtone distribution for independent unsigned artists. And that, I think people just saw, we met with investors, we were trying to raise money. I think I was 19, 20 at the time. And we met with like Guitar Center's executive and some bigger producers. And it just, you could kind of see the writing on the wall that it was a fad. So that kind of fell apart and kind of led me to the next venture, which was similar, but
one question on that, because I think you said you did it for 3 years. Is that right? You tried to make a go of it?
Yeah, that sounds about right. 2 or 3 years.
And so, if you haven't, did you get a product out? Were you selling? Did you make any money off of it?
We were out, and it was making money. Obviously, nothing life changing, but we just knew, just with development costs and marketing and advertising, that we just needed an influx of cash. That a struggling musician that just went through a band breakup, I didn't have the resources. So we really needed an influx of cash to get it to that next level, to get an acquisition, essentially.
Now, one more question just on that, then we'll keep on with your journey. When you go and try and pitch investors and you're trying, you're 19, 20 years old, was it that you were, the investors thought you were too young, they didn't like the idea, that they didn't have enough market for it, they didn't see the potential? Kind of what was the, what do you think the reason was that they're saying, that they passed on or didn't want to invest in it?
I'm sure age was definitely a factor. I definitely looked up much younger then. No one really ever said that. It was more talking about, hey, what have you built? What's the technology? What's your plan? Here's your walking through the business plan. So I didn't really get the sense, and I would imagine it played a part, but it was more of, hey, we want to see how ringtones play out. And it was really, looking back, they could tell that, hey, we think this might be just a fad, and it's probably just too risky for us to get involved. So where it landed with pretty much everyone was like, hey, we want to wait and see what happens with you guys for a little bit more time. And then they ended up being correct.
So now you tried that for a while. You made a little bit of money, but it never really took off. In order to,
nothing. And I'm still working a day job, just trying to make ends meet. I've got this tour van that I'm driving as my daily driver. It was an interesting.
And what were you, just out of curiosity, what were you doing as a day job as you were trying to get that up and going?
Just random office corporate stuff. Nothing, just anything really I could get my hands on that would pay the bills.
So now you do that for a couple of years, and 2 or 3 years, you try and make a go of it. You just can't get the investment dollars. You can't get it off the ground to where it's going to support you enough, and you say, okay, probably time to move on, so to speak. So then, as you're trying to figure out what the next thing is, how did you land on? Because I think that kind of brings you a bit more to where you're at today of web development and design and those type of things. How did you kind of transition to there?
So when that kind of went under, when I knew, okay, this is just, it's time to throw in the towel, I was, once again, second time being in this place. And I guess, like, once you go through a breakup once, it's a little bit easier the second time. And so it was a little bit easier, but again, I was left with this, okay, what am I going to do? And I was fortunate in this next phase where someone knew I had this technology and they wanted to start a ringtone company. So they essentially brought me on and acquired the technology, and we ended up turning their idea into essentially what I wanted to build out, with not only ringtones, but having an entire platform, like social media, specifically for independent and unsigned artists, since that's what I was on. I could relate to it. So we're really trying to create a platform that would shine light and on these artists that normally don't get the attention they deserve. So I did that for about 3 or 4 more years, and then that kind of, the investors didn't want to put any more money into it, and it fell once again, fell apart quickly. And during that time, we had used agencies to build everything out for us, from web design, development, SEO, everything. We worked with an agency. So I got a firsthand look of what this looks like when you're working with an agency. So that client agency relationship. And when that fell apart, I go, man, I just feel like I could do this better than what our experience was with these guys. And so I literally just decided I'm going to start a web design development agency. And so I learned how to like take templates and start to custom.
One question on that, because you decided that, but how did you come out of it was just out of, hey, we've had other agencies do it, we've had other people do it. It couldn't be that hard, and I'll try it out. Is that kind of the thought process, or how did you kind of?
Yeah, well, I'd always been involved with tech in some capacity, always. Like I've always been drawn to it. So I started when at the last company, I was really trying to like get my hands dirty and just like HTML and like, okay, if we need a landing page, why don't I just try and create it? So it's literally just Google open and trying to figure out like, what's my problem? And slowly but surely I was able to make something look decent using templates. And then from there, I was like, you know what, let's just go feet first and start an agency and see if I can do this myself. And so it was kind of, I didn't really have much of a choice. I knew I didn't really want to go back to your typical corporate life. So I figured this is a great opportunity to just jump feet first in and really, throw my punches at it.
So now then you said you started taking classes, you kind of tried to figure out your own websites out, got a foundation under you. And then, how did you start to get clients or build a business or reach out to people, or kind of how did you start to grow something?
So fortunate with that again. So another PR agency we were using at the time, I was just talking with him. We ended up becoming really good friends, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm kind of pivoting. He's like, hey, I might have a client for you. So he just referred me a client. I never put together a proposal. I had no idea what I was doing. What do I charge for this? I think for their first website, like e-commerce, I was like, yeah, $1,500. And like, okay. And I was like, oh, okay. And then it was, okay, I got to figure out what I'm doing now. And
so
then
Steve, and that's a great way to launch. And hey, so I got a client. I think I got a client for you. Do you want to do it? Sure. How much are you going to charge? Well, I'll charge $1,500. Great. That's probably a lot cheaper than what they were paying everybody else.
I couldn't tell you where that number came from. It just felt right. And so I made a decision to go, hey, there's no looking back. Let's just figure this out as we go.
So then you started, and I assume then you start to build a client base and you start to build it around there, and you're still doing that today. Is that right? Or at least in part, that's what you're doing.
Yeah. So it's the same agency as, God, it's been almost 10 years, I want to say.
So now and then I think and that kind of dovetails my next question, which is looking kind of forward now to the future of kind of what's next, or what are you going to do in the next 6 to 12 months? How are you going to grow? I think you mentioned you're going to start doing some courses and start to offer that as part of what you do.
Yeah. So I obviously have the agency side of things, which is great. But I really want to create a course to train people like myself that want to have an agency, and to really walk them through from A to Z, from how do you put together a proposal? How do you market yourself? How do you, what agreements do you need? How do you generate business, right? What's your lead magnet going to be? How do you handle clients? How do you handle difficult clients? How do you make sure you get paid right? All the stuff that I've learned over 10 years to really try and fast track people that want to get into it, just not sure where to start and how to avoid some of the nonsense I got myself into.
No, and I think that's understanding. And it's interesting because we're doing a bit in a different way and a different approach, are doing that with the law side as well, in the sense of, there are a lot of times we get clients that come in and they say, okay, I've got a prototype, we help them with the patent, and then it's kind of like, now what next? Kind of what do I do with this? And so we started to a little bit kind of along the similar lines is to say, here's how you go, here's some context or ways you start going about product development and prototyping and manufacturing, and how do you do all these various things that you really need to get it started to start a business. And yet there isn't a manual. You don't just say, oh, how do I start a business? I go do these things. It's, and so I think that there's a lot of value in helping people to understand, here's the steps and here's some guidance along the way that will help them to actually learn from the mistakes of others and have an increased likelihood of success.
Yeah, exactly. And so all these little things, like I wish I would have brought on like recurring revenue earlier, because I didn't want to host and maintain sites because I just didn't want to deal with it. And I thought, oh man, it's just these small little $50, $100 a month recurring revenue. Turns out I wasted years and thousands of dollars by just not doing, some of the what seemed like hard work that just isn't. And so it's really trying to fill those potholes for people before they hop into it and give them a roadmap of here's what works for me and here's why.
So I think that makes good sense. And I think that, learning from those or figuring out how to continue to grow things and a pivot in the future definitely is a great place to be. Well, as we start to wrap up, we talked a little bit through your journey, and I always ask two questions at the end of the podcast. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, so along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
I'm going to have to say, I can't believe I jumped the gun on this, but it really was the recurring revenue piece, where there's this mentality that I have of, you think just short term where it's like, oh, $50 a month, that's not going to do anything. That's not going to move the needle. But when you start to get 50 or 100 of those, it just compounds. And now I'm in a place where I'm able to diversify. So with the hosting and maintenance and this recurring revenue that I thought was just peanuts, turns out that if I have a down month, that kind of protects the nest egg and keeps revenue going. So that would probably be the dumbest decision I made, is just avoiding some of the diversification of revenue streams.
No, and I think that, it's interesting. It seems like that's where a lot of businesses are going is, hey, it can be, especially in the service industry, if you're always having the revolving door, always having to generate new clients, generate new work. And if once you kind of cut it off, if that's the end of it, it makes it for a little bit more feel like you're on the hamster wheel or, a gerbil wheel, so to speak. And if you can say, hey, now how can we keep the client for longer? And that can be everything from recurring revenue. It can be offering expanded services, offering a service they'll need multiple times. But those type of things, I think, often go overlooked, and yet they can be a valuable stream of revenue for the business.
Well, yeah. And the little secret too, for me, at least with that, like hosting and maintenance side of my business, is that it keeps the relationship with the client active. And so when they have a good experience with you, for like if it's an emergency situation or just anything, that you respond quick, whatever it might be. I can't even tell you how many referrals I've got just from hosting and maintenance, that we've responded quickly to their emails. And so now that trust has developed, and now they're referring me to other potential clients.
No, and I think that there's a good point in there, in the sense that, that's one of the things that kind of, again, on that is everybody, keeping that relationship alive, keeping them in yourself front of mind and in touch with them is way that now when they need that next thing, when they'll think of you. And if they, on the other hand, if it's been years since they've done it, or it's been a while or months or years of that, then you're less on forefront of mind, and they may not, when they need that service, think of you, not because you didn't do a good job and they didn't have a good relationship. It's just, you're not forefront of mind. So I think that's
out of sight, out of mind. Point. So that would be for sure. When I look back, I just kick myself for going, how much opportunity that I missed. But hey, what is the saying that when's the best time to plant a tree, 20 years ago or right now? Yep. Right. And so that's definitely one of those things where those little hidden diversifications of revenue can really add up to really big potential.
So now we'll jump to the second question, and it probably dovetails off the first, but if you're talking now to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Profitability. But probably deeper than that is really, really thinking about the value that you can provide, right? So before a client invests any dollar with me, before they invest anything, I spend about 2 hours with them, and we do what we call a customer avatar discovery session. So we figure out exactly what their ideal customer looks like and what that customer needs to see and read on the new site and experience in order to have the best chance of success. Because I don't build websites for my clients, I build it for my clients' customers. So what I mean by all this is, don't be afraid to go first, right? Provide value first. So everything is a relationship. There's no B2C or B2B. It's all human to human. And
Hmm.
so if you're able to find a way where you're providing value right out of the gate, your close rate and conversion rate and the whole experience is just going to be better throughout, because the more that you invest up front and the more value you provide, the more that you're going to extract out of that, and everybody's winning.
No, and I think that, you know, the one thing you touched on, it wasn't necessarily the only or the main point is, one of the things I had to learn was, you can build a really cool looking website that doesn't do anything, right? In the sense that it doesn't convert people, it doesn't really give them a call to action, it doesn't do it or have any return, but it looks great, and
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite pastimes now that I've got into that is going to law firm websites. Which there are a ton of law firm websites that they look awesome, they look really nice and professional, and it's like, well, I don't know how much it's going to cost, I don't know how to get a hold of them, I don't know what I'm supposed to do if I do want to get going, and it's like, because they don't provide anything, but it looks really cool, and it's like, no, you need to actually provide that value. So I think that there's
Yeah.
definitely a good point
The
there.
look is important just for trust, but really people buy what they read.
Mm,
And I see so many businesses that want like video backgrounds and they care about all these different things that are not necessarily unimportant, but
mm.
really spend the majority of your time crafting their headlines. What's the value? Who are you speaking to? And what are their problems? And what is their current situation? And how do you get them to their desired situation? And the only way you can do that is through copy. And so test your copy and make sure that you're designing something for your end user in mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice and great feedback. Well, just before we wrap up, this is a reminder to people, we are going to do the bonus question where we talk a little bit about intellectual property. So before people stop listening, if you want to hear some great insight into intellectual
Gonna be a
property,
good one.
it'll be a great one. So stay tuned. But if you don't have interest in that, we'll wrap up the journey, and we'll with that. If people want to now reach out to you, they want to find out more about your services, they want to be a client, they want to be a investor, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above. What's the best way to connect up to you, find out more?
Yeah, best way is my website, taggartmediagroup.com, Taggart mediagroup.com.
All right. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out to you, find out more, and if they're in need of a website, definitely check out your services.
I
Well,
appreciate that.
well, thank you for coming on. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. And for all of you that are listeners, if you don't listen to the bonus question, but make sure to, if you ever want to tell your journey and be a guest on the podcast, just go to Inventive Journey or inventiveguest.com. If I can not be tongue-tied,
It's Friday.
Inventive Guest, inventiveguest.com, and apply to be on the podcast. If also make sure, if you're a listener, to make sure to click subscribe so you get notifications as all our awesome episodes come out, and leave us a review so new people can find us. Last but not least, if you ever need any patents or trademarks or anything with your business, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time to chat with us. So with that, we'll wrap up. We'll transition over the bonus question. So now that the shoe's on a little bit the other foot, I always get asked the questions during the normal episode, but now I give the microphone over to you, so to speak. So what is your top or number one intellectual property question?
So I wanted to hear your thoughts on what kind of I guess your opinion on software patents. Because the way I look at it is, man, patenting math seems like quite a leap, and especially the guys that just obviously sue everyone under the sun. But in terms of just how software patents are structured, would love to hear your opinion on them.
Yeah, and that's a softball question. So thank you. No, but
Oh,
so I've done a lot of software patents. That's why I say it's a softball question, in the sense that I worked for a long time. Prior to starting my own business, I worked for some of the biggest law firms, and they had some of the biggest clients. So I did Intel, I did Red Hat, I did Amazon.com, all of which had a lot of software. And even now with my law firm, it's not as much name recognized, but we do a ton of software for startups and small businesses. And to your point, it's not necessarily the math. If all you're doing is A plus B equals C, when you go and you say, okay, forever people did A plus B equals C on by hand, and now I'm going to stick that on a computer. That's really not a software patent in the sense, and you're not going to be able to get a patent on that. Where a lot of times it comes in more is let's say, as an example, I'll give you an example. So one of the businesses I've done on my own, or that I started was with wearables, and that has a lot of software behind it. But it's more of, as an example, the wearables were originally, and it's pivoted a bit, was for hydration monitoring for athletes and for people that run long distances, do wearables that are for hydration. And some of the things are, how do you do all the analytics? So once you go, you have a sensor, you take some measurements, and then once you do those measurements, what do you do with the data? How do you analyze it? How do you make a determination? Are they hydrated? Are they not hydrated? Are they going through a dehydration event, or are they overhydrated? And how long can they, or before we should or call someone or give a warning? And so a lot of that is going to be under software, but it's not necessarily the lines of code, which are too deep, and it's not high enough level to just, hey, we want to give everybody alert of hydration, and it's so high level that anybody would do that. But it's kind of that, how you go about doing it, how I get the data, how I do the analytics, how I provide the notifications, who do I provide the notifications, am I communicating between devices, so between a server that does the analytics, the wearable, and a phone. And so it's that kind of thing when you get into a lot of software that does it. Similar on when I did Intel is another example, is on the chip level. They have a ton of security so that you don't get hacked, right? So that way somebody doesn't intrude into your computer, they don't take it over, and they don't steal all your data. And so that was one of the things they did with Intel. But there's a lot that goes into it. How do you set up your software so that it doesn't allow for intrusion? How do you get secured areas that simply can't get into the system? And there's a lot that goes into that. So that's where the software, again, it's a lot of the implementation and the how that
Well, what if it's like
value with the software.
What if it's like 90% the same, but I just tweak some things in the code? It's like, well, yeah, it doesn't do, like, is that violating a patent?
It depends on how broad or narrow the patent is.
Right. And I know that's an unfair question because of legal stuff, but I'm trying, this is the one thing that's always gotten stuck with me, is like, how do you patent a loading bar? Right, or stuff like that, where I go, this at the end of the day.
Let me give you maybe another example that I worked on in a previous firm was with Google. And so you think of the little window, when you're watching, Netflix or Amazon or YouTube or anything else, you can normally watch on the big window. Some with some of the newer phones, you can swipe out and they'll just have a little window so you can multitask, right? So you can do it. Right. But how do you? It's not that they don't just patent the concept. Take a big window on a phone and make it a little window. That one's probably, if you're to put a patent on it. But if they're to take now, how do you make it so that it determines what when you're exiting it out, when you're intending to or watch it on little phones or little screens, such that you're doing other things? How do you move it around? What size should it be? What aspect ratio should it be? Should we adjust the volume, or should we mute it or not mute it? How do you exit out of it? And all of those kind of determinations are what they go into. Now, to your question is, how can, if I make a small tweak, let's say I move the X bar, if I move I click the X, you're probably going to have an issue because they've covered that broad of a thing. So they get a fairly, conceptually, if you're saying what is a unique or novel thing that my software is doing, how is it different? That's where you focus your patent, and then you can usually get fairly broad or reasonable coverage on that. It's a hard question to answer because
I know. What do you think would happen?
But go ahead.
What would your opinion be if software patents just were gone, obliterated? You can't patent software; it's impossible. Like, what do you think would happen with just kind of the industry as a whole?
So let me ask the question. I'll flip the question to you. What would you do if you didn't have a cell phone anymore?
Well, I mean, we kind of died.
Or what would you do if you didn't have the internet anymore?
But the internet didn't start because of patents, and it's certainly
no. And I'm not saying. But the question would be is where, and I'll give you the reason for the question is, a lot of the motivation for people creating the internet, for creating phones, for creating apps is monetary incentivizing, right? In the sense that they want to be able to make a compensation for making your iPhone.
1,000%.
No, so then the question is if you were to take all software patents away, and now you can it was in a world where as soon as I created a great software, whatever it is, application on the phone, whatever that is, whether it's Uber and how they do theirs, whether it's Google and their search engine, take all that away and say, yeah, if you can figure out how to copy it, you can compete. Then is there that same monetary, I'm going to go out and compete in the marketplace, or you're going to say, if I'm the first one, I'm going to put a ton of time, money, and effort behind it. I'm going to be the first one to figure out how to do it, how to program it, but then somebody's going to copy me and then I'm out of business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but let me ask you this then, right? So,
sure.
And maybe this is a horrible analogy, but I'm very curious. So you got KFC, right? There are 11 herbs and spices that I'm sure is patented.
It's
But if
actually trade secret, but go ahead.
yeah,
Yep.
but I have every right to try and figure out what it is and open up my own chicken seasoning,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
If I can look at code and go, oh, let me try and make my own, like how is that violating a patent and how is that bad for the internet?
Because first of all, you have to have code to look at, right? If KFC said if everybody could go and let's give it a different, because KFC is really a brand, right? And so that's a lot of the reason, because there are other places that sell good chicken. You go to KFC because you like the brand. So I
Sure.
think the more analogy or better analogy would be is if you go to KFC and now everybody could start their own KFC. They could take the exact logo, same name of the company, and go start their own KFCs everywhere. Would KFC have the same incentive to build a business, to franchise? Would they be able to franchise, have as many locations? And it's hard when if you're a brand, or let's say you're Pepsi or Coke, and somebody started selling Pepsi and they just started making the exact same label. You can't, no, there would be no financial incentive to build a business.
Totally,
And so
totally agree
that's
with that.
where I think that now the question
It's
is
just when it gets to code and math, I go, I don't, is this holding back the industry or is
but
this helping?
where it's going to take that is the question is you're saying, once if I can look at their code and how to tweak it, you have to, that assumes that the code is already there, right? That they've already figured it out and you're building on top of it, as opposed to if you go and code something yourself and you figure out a new and something different that hasn't been done, no barrier to entry to you. It's only if you're saying I'm taking what somebody else has done, building on top of it, than the person that originally figured it out.
That's not, I didn't mean like actually take their code. But
but the same kind of concept, right? If Google has now proven the concept that search engine optimization is a great market, and they figured out how to make good search results, then everybody is going to say, how do they do it? Their competitive advantage is that they're the best search engine in the world, right? And if everybody can just simply say, I'm going to copy what they did, I'm going to look and see what they did, I'm going to tweak it slightly, you can still patent the tweak. So maybe that's one differentiation, in the sense that if you build on top of it, and where I always give the example, and we'll wrap it up because I'm sure everybody else, but it's a fun conversation. So I love discussing it. But let's say, in your example, one that I think is a little bit easier to grasp is black and white television, right? Back in the day, 50 or 100 years ago, whenever it came out, 75 years ago, I'll guess, they had black and white television, right? And they got a patent on it. And if you wanted to do a black and white television, you had to go through their patent or get a license from them. You had somebody that came along and figured out how to do color television, how to make that better. So they now have a patent that's really good on color television that everybody wants, but it builds on top of the original black and white television. So in that sense, the people that have the black and white, they can continue to have the monopoly on black and white for 20 years. And then but the people with color television also have the patent, and the people with the black and white can't make color television. So it creates hey, if you build something, you provide it to the public, we'll give you a monopoly for a period of time, but it allows people to know what you're doing and how to do it. So part of the trade-off with patents is that you have to disclose how it works, what you're doing, how you're making the decision making. Right. And so since you're disclosing that to the public, you're giving away your secrets. Now we'll give you a 20-year period where you have that monopoly, but people can start to build on top of that during that 20 years. They can either sell it to you, they can license it, they can make products that go on top of it, and they own those things that they're building on top of. So it's kind of that trade-off. Whether or not it's perfect or not, is that you're trying to incentivize people, whether it's software, hardware, mechanical stuff. I think it's kind of the same thing, is you're trying to incentivize people to build those platforms that do make a better, and giving them a reward of, hey, you will have some way to keep this proprietary for a period of time, such that all of that time, money, and effort, because most of the time, especially with software, once you see how somebody's done it, it makes sense, and that's a lot of inventions.
Of course, the magic's gone from it.
Yeah, the magic is out. Oh yeah, I know. It's kind of like the magic. You refer to magic. Once you know how the magic trick is done, I could do that. That's really easy. But it's that first person that figures it out that takes all the time and effort to figure it out. And if you remove that incentive that say, once you figure it out, everybody's going to copy you, then they're going to say, well, I'm not going to invest millions of dollars or years of my time only to have somebody easily copy me. So that is a long rabbit hole, really fun conversation. You can get me going for hours and we'd have a great debate. But there's a little bit of your answer to your top intellectual property question. I hope all the viewers enjoyed it. I went on a bit of a rant, but I enjoy it, and it's a fun area to talk about. Well, thank you again John for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. It's great.